Summer's in full effect. First Sunday in July. Happy summer. I love seeing all of you in your Hawaiian shirts and stuff. We're starting a new series today called Ohana. And so because it's a new series, we have a new 4x4 available. You can either download that off our website or you can get it on the back server on the way out. A 4x4 is a Bible study designed for you and three other people, three friends, or three other couples to meet together for a month and study the Bible together. Really, I again would encourage you to have a meal, and that makes it better. Jesus had a lot of meals with people when he was teaching them. So make sure you grab that. It goes right along with this sermon series for July, and so make sure you check that out. Ohana is a Hawaiian word, so please wear your Hawaiian shirts, Hawaiian dresses, beach garb to church. Feel free to wear beach stuff to church this month, and frankly, any month. We don't care what you wear to church. So long as you're wearing something, we're totally fine with that. So please, don't feel like you have to dress up or anything. That's just weird. It is a Hawaiian word, and it's a word for family. But it's a word family in a much broader sense, and not just the people that live in your home with you, but Ohana would extend to your friends and your cousins and your church and your in-laws even, your entire race. It's a community of people. Kind of like it takes a village, it takes an Ohana, all right? And it's kind of cool because it has this idea wrapped into it in the Hawaiian culture that we are bound together and that we're all responsible for one another so that no one gets left out, no one gets forgotten or left behind. For me, it's a really cool picture of what the church is supposed to be, right? Family. We're in this together. Now, there's a real long, technical, historical, kind of cool way that the word Ohana comes about. It comes from the taro plant. I'm not going to tell you about that because my reasons for making this series called Ohana are much simpler. Back in 2002, Disney released a movie called Lilo and Stitch. Most of my knowledge comes from Disney movies. If you haven't seen it, you got to see it. In fact, I think you ought to watch it sometime this month. It will really help you understand this series. But the idea is there's two sisters, an older sister, younger sister. They're doing life together because their parents were killed in a car accident. And little sister Lilo finds Stitch, who is a rebellious alien from another planet. It's a movie, all right? I didn't say it was real. And he doesn't have a family either. And it's in this context that was the first time I heard the word Ohana. The way Lilo's dad explains it to her is that Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten. I love that. That's us. Nobody gets left behind or forgotten. Typically, when people in the family are getting left behind or forgotten, it's our kids. It's the next generation. And so it's out of that context that I want to spend this whole month diving into what the scriptures have to tell us about parenting, about being godly parents, about biblically parenting the next generation. And that's why I love the idea of Ohana, because many of you in here have children at various ages and stages of life. Many of you don't. But the idea of Ohana is that we are all responsible together for pouring into and raising up the next generation of Christ followers. God has put, if you think for a moment, any number of young people in your life in any number of ways, whether you're a parent or grandparent, aunt, you're a coach, you're a youth leader, you're a neighbor. I'm prayerful that there's at least one kid on this planet you kind of like a little bit, even if it comes down to that, right? And we have a responsibility to those kids, to our Ohana, to hear what the Lord has to say and put it into practice. All that to say, really, that I'm just telling you that nobody can check out during this whole series in July, right? Just because you don't have kids doesn't mean you can just say, oh, I'm not coming to church because they're talking about being a parent. Does that make sense? So you're all here. Oh, a couple of you are here. That's awesome. Hi, I'm Adam. Welcome to The Crossing. This is this message part you actually have to engage with. Let's just start here. Parenting is hard. At least one. I thought somebody is engaged. Parenting is hard, and it's joyful, and it's frustrating, and it's invigorating, and that is all in the first 12 minutes of being a parent. All of that happens. And thankfully, God, in all of his might and power and wisdom, is not too big to help us in every need that we have, which would include parenting the children he's entrusted to you and I. And I hope you understand when I say I don't want any of you hearing what I have to say about parenting. Nobody needs to hear that. I don't have it all together as a parent, but thankfully there is one who does. And so we're going to unpack what God has given us in his word about parenting, and like the wise men in Jesus' parable, we're going to put it into practice so that when the storms come, our Ohana is built on the strong foundation and we will stand through the storms, right? So I also want to just kind of preface this thing is that this isn't a series to make you mad either or sad, right? There's no such thing as a perfect parent. So without a doubt, much like me, we've all failed miserably at times in raising our kids. And we can't undo the past or undo the mistakes. I would give just about anything to go back and undo some of the things or learn the principles that I've learned. I typically learn them after I mess up really bad, right? That's not helpful. I guess the whole hindsight, the next time kind of thing. So we could spend the rest of our lives languishing and being upset about the mistakes we've made, or we can be resolute and move forward and have a better and more positive future. I'm going to do that, right? So let's move forward and do that. It's never too late to begin the healing process and to repair and rebuild relationships and try to do things better. So let's just jump in with both feet, ready to hear what God has to say, ready to put it into practice. Because here's what I know, and this might sound a little crazy, but I believe if you spend a little noodle time on it and think about it, there's great freedom and hope in this thought. Godly parenting, biblical parenting, has nothing to do with your children. It has everything to do with you and I being faithful to Jesus and his word. Godly parenting has nothing to do with your kids. It has everything to do with you and I being faithful to Jesus and his word. I've titled today's sermon, Train. And we're going to jump into just one verse, a very popular verse, a very misunderstood verse of Scripture in Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 6. It simply says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Would you just say that with me? Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. This verse, for some reason, is misconstrued, misunderstood. It kind of usually gets translated in some way, kind of like, hey, let's do our best for our kids, help them to be good people, moral people, make good decisions, go to church, because at some point they're going to rebel and live this wildly crazy life for most of their life, and then sometime before they die, if you've done it right, they'll come back to the Lord. Right? Have you heard it's kind of that way? That's not very comforting. Not very hope-filled, I don't think. I don't know that that's the way God would say, hey, this is wise counsel. Let's hold this out and follow it this way. And on top of all that, it's just not true. It's not what the verse means. If you and I, what we're going to do today, not if, we're going to dig a little deeper beneath the surface of this verse, and what we'll find is a very refreshing, common sense, hope-filled approach to raising the next generation, raising our kids, and even some practical guidance built in. So let's just walk through this verse word by word, phrase by phrase. The first thing says train up. It's a verb. You know what a verb is, right? An action, something you do. And here's a command, so you don't have a choice. This is what you're to do, Mom and Dad. They're your kids. God says, I'm giving them to you. Train them up. And the word is the word hanak in Hebrew, and it means to train, to lead, to dedicate, to consecrate, which, hold on, that's a Bible word. That's a holy word, right? Yeah, this is big deal parenting. It also means to make submissive for teaching. And it's a command which takes time and intentionality, doing things on purpose for this to happen. Train up a child. That's who we're supposed to train up, our child. The word child is a really cool word. It's a Hebrew word that you don't need to know about. It's na'ar, which isn't going to help you. But it's a cool word, and the reason I tell you that is because it basically is defined by a child in any stage of growth. A young person in any stage of growth. And the reason I say that is because we find this word many times in the Old Testament in a variety of ways. The word is used child to represent Samuel when he's a newborn. It's also used to define Moses as a toddler, and then Samuel again when he is a young child. It's used for Ishmael when he's of preteen age, 11, 12, 13. It's Joseph when he's a 17-year-old. It's Shechem as a young man of marrying age. It's the same word. Almost as if God's saying that our parenting never ends. That we'll always have influence over our children at every stage of growth, right? This means yes. Okay. So we're going to train up a child of any age in the way he should go. And this is kind of where the clear meaning of this verse takes a little bit of a turn. We typically hear the way he should go and immediately think our way. That idea of the way would be better translated his way or her way, their way, in accordance with their way, with the way they were created, designed, naturally bent towards. Let me help. Proverbs 30, verse 18 and 19 uses the same word for way. It's the word derek, and it says, there are three things that are too amazing for me. The writer of Proverbs, Solomon, says, just four that I don't even understand. The way of the eagle in the sky, the way of the snake on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, the way of a man with a young woman. And it seems as though we're to train up our children in their way, the natural way, God-given way, the way that God made them to go. Tell me that makes sense to you. Okay, good. When we train our kids toward our way, we may very well be setting them up for a life of failure and frustration because we're leading them to live in a way that contradicts the way they were designed. Charles Swindoll speaks of this in a book he wrote. He says, we receive our children from the hand of God, not as soft, pliable lumps of clay ready to be molded into what we think they should become. Each child comes with a set of abilities, intellectual capacity, and a way of perceiving and thinking, all of which were given by God. We can surely influence and even mold them to a certain extent, but our efforts are limited. On the one hand, if parents ignore or discourage a talent, it may never emerge. On the other hand, if a parent cultivates a talent, it may likely become part of the child. And so God counsels us to train up our children in the way that He created them to go. And then the verse goes on, and when he is old, really another cool phrase. The word has this word picture of not old and decrepit and on death's doorstep and a grown, mature adult, but rather it has the idea of facial hair, is what the word means, is when they start receiving facial hair, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age. And so what God's saying is train up your child in the way that I made them to go. As they're nearing adulthood, they won't depart from it, which means, literally just means turn aside. This verse is incredible. Like, what a blessing. It's full of life for a parent. We help our children know themselves and like themselves, to be themselves, and when we do, their paths become self-evident. Their paths will be a natural fit to the people they grow up to become. Why then should they turn away from that? Rather, they will walk confidently in God's sovereignty, the path He's laid out for them. And so I'm hoping at some point in your brain you're going, man, okay, I didn't know that. That's cool. And you come to this one question, at least this is where I go. That sounds good, but how? How? If this whole thing revolves around the way my child is bent, my child having a way that is specific to them, that's different from the other children I have, and that is different from every other kid on the planet, how do I know their way, and how can I lead them in their way? It's a great question. I'm so glad you're asking that question right now. If you're not, please start, because the rest of the sermon really won't make a lot of sense if you're not asking that question. This is part of the sermon where we talk about homework. Each week we're going to have some homework, right, where we apply the scriptures at home. And I need to just say this. These are principles to live by. The book of Proverbs, it's a wisdom and principles. It's not a quick fix. Can I just take some weight off your shoulders, Mom and Dad, and remind you that our children are bent towards sin, towards evil? They have the same free will that you did. All that to say that we can do the very best we possibly can in training them up the way they should go, and they may make a choice to not go that way. And this is going to sound harsh. That's not on you. It's their choice. This means, yes, I understand that. And as forgive me if this is wrong, as sucky as that is, it is. And so I want you to understand, you're not blaming yourself. And I guess for me personally, it's one of those, so long as I've done everything I possibly can to point them to the Lord and train them up in the way they should go, my hope is they won't depart from it when they get older. But if they do, I just have more to pray about and keep influencing. Okay, so that's just a little side note, extra bonus lesson for you today. But your homework is a two-parter. Observe and encourage. How do I know their way and lead them in their way? You observe and encourage. We can know our child's way by observing his or her way. And this takes time. There are no shortcuts to this. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 11 says, even small children are known by their actions. Our children are making themselves known to us every day. Don't drift. Don't let your senses dull to what's happening. Don't ignore what you're hearing and seeing. Carefully observe what they do, how they do it, what they like, what they don't like, their passions, their abilities. Pay attention to what they're doing. It kind of reminds me of Mary in the Gospels when Mary is watching Jesus, and it says that she treasured all these things up in her heart. She was paying attention. She was storing all these things up about him in her heart so she knew how to be mom to God, which has got to be a pretty difficult task, right? So when you see your kids doing things well, encourage them, affirm them. If they clearly enjoy a particular kinds of activities, give them more opportunities to explore them and give them a whole lot of room to fail and fall flat on their face so that then they might explore some other options, some other things. And this takes some serious effort on our parts as parents. Remember, our tendency is we want to train them up in the way we think they should go rather than understanding how God created them to go, their natural bent. So we'll need to discipline ourselves to observe that way that God uniquely created them. I love Psalm 139. David wrote it. I love it so much, I'm just going to go ahead and preach on it next week. But a little preview, just one verse. Verse 13, David writes of the Lord, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." You see, the Spirit of God is what makes us, not just nature or some biological process. Certainly that's part of the deal. I'm not going to talk about that this morning. But it's God who does this. David's saying, only you are the only one that put me together inside my mother's womb. You fixed my vital organs together. You put them together. You knit me together in my mother's womb. It's this picture of weaving a beautiful tapestry is the word picture. It's just so cool. Especially when you see someone that's pregnant, you go, man, God is weaving someone inside of you. That's amazing. David's like, you worked over my inmost being, so in your way, my shape, my size, my color, my everything came together to become my personality because you put it all together. And it's this fabulous expression of God's sovereignty within mom. God is at work laboring and spending time with, weaving together those little things that made me and you and our kids what we're supposed to be. And obviously David was aware of the biological process. He didn't deny that. Rather, he teaches us that God so supersedes that process, that he is directly involved in fashioning each one of us into the person he wants us to be. So not only did God create David's physical body, he also created his personality. He gave David his particular bent. David was the person he was because God created him that way, physically, mentally, emotionally. And just as God was personally involved in the creation of David, so he was in you and me and our children. Our kids are the result of the attentive and careful and thoughtful and intimate, detailed, creative work of God, which is where all of you shout amen. Is anybody listening at all? And you're going, yeah, but this morning when they got up, they weren't. That wasn't of God. Just kidding. Their personality, their gender, their height, their features, their abilities, their disabilities, their everything are what they are because God made them precisely that way. And listen to this, God never says oops. He doesn't make mistakes. That's a joyful thing for a parent. If God wanted them to be differently, he would have made them differently. Their genes, their chromosomes, the size of their nose, the shape of their ears are what they are because God designed them that way. And we can take great joy and delight in observing our kids and observing the way God so intimately created them. And when we observe and discover our children's natural desires and unique abilities, then we encourage them to go that way. If a child is gifted artistically, we don't try to get them involved in every sport that travels around the country. You laugh, but my goodness, really? If a child is naturally kind of melancholy and stoic and dreamy, we don't get on them for not being jubilant and doing cartwheels and telling us everything that's on their mind. That's not who they are. And yet, we do that, don't we? So we pay attention to who our kids are and encourage them. That way they'll develop the way God made them to go. This isn't to say that we're going to just allow kids to do whatever they want, right, with no correction. However, we can choose to encourage constantly and correct and rebuke sparingly. Remember, we're training them up in the way God made them to go, not in our way. And I know when I'm most picky about correcting every single solitary thing, which I have those moments, we'll say weekly, just because I have to look like I have some idea what I'm talking about. Forgive me if that was a lie. But when that happens, it's because I'm trying to get them to do something that I want them to do it my way, because it's easier. It's flat out lazy, to be honest with you. It's easy to just say no or just do it this way because I don't have to get up and help. And have you ever been there? Okay. But remember, we're training up in the way God made them to go. We're not forcing them to go a certain way. Remember, that word we learned for train up is the word hanak. It's in many of the similar languages to Hebrew, it has to do with the mouth, and it's the picture of a horse with a bridle and a bit in its mouth. I love this. This is so good. The word picture is of this bit in the horse's bridle, in which subdues the horse for the purpose of directing its natural energies without breaking its spirit. Isn't that cool? It's the design of a bridle. Only an insecure or novice or amateur rider puts a bit in a horse's mouth in order to dominate that animal. Experienced riders know that the horse's bit is a connection of relationship between the rider and their horse. Horses want to run because God gave them that desire and created them to do that. And a wise and caring rider will use the bit and the reins to help the horse achieve its purpose in a safe and effective way. Tell me, that doesn't relate to parenting. That's what we do, right? We train up our children in the way they should go to help them become the people that God created them to be. Encourage constantly, rebuke, correct sparingly. There's going to be punishment. There's going to be consequences, of course. If you're not sure how to do that, read the book of Proverbs. There's tons of wisdom about how to and when to discipline our children. It speaks much of discipline, the rod of discipline, rod and reproof, which is talking about some physical discipline as well as words of correction. This has to, Proverbs 13:24 says, whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. So that will need to happen. But the more we observe and encourage our kids in the way that God made them to go, there will be much greater joy and peace and confidence in our parenting, as well as our children will move toward living in their God-given sweet spot with joy and peace and confidence in who they are and where they're headed. So train up your child. Be active. Be a participant in that. In the way that God made them to go. the way that he created them. And when they become adults and they head towards adulthood, they won't turn aside from that. How do we do that? By observing and encouraging. And Ohana family, that takes time. That takes time. Pat and Ruth Williams, in their book, You've Got to Be Kidding, that's a great title, shared this story of a preacher you probably know. His name is Billy Graham. And they wrote, his fame was growing rapidly beginning 50 years ago during a spectacular series of meetings held in Los Angeles. Thousands of people were coming, including film stars and athletes and all kinds of celebrities. They came to hear him. They came to meet with him. And as the series entered its 8th week in L.A., it was consuming all of Billy Graham's time and energy. God was speaking through him in a powerful way. Toward the end of the crusade, Graham's sister-in-law and her husband came to Los Angeles bringing a baby with them, and he squeezed in time to meet with his relatives. And during that encounter, he made the comment that the little girl was cute and asked, "To whom does she belong?" The sister-in-law's mouth dropped open and said, "Why, she's yours. She's your daughter." Billy Graham had been away from home for so long, he didn't even recognize his own little Anne when she was brought to the crusade. And that night, the great preacher resolved that he would spend more time at home with his children. Mom, dad, family, don't be fooled by this myth of quality time. Quantity time is what it takes to be a parent. Quantity, right? It takes time to know someone else deeply. Lots of time. Time you don't think you have, but you better find. Time to observe and encourage and love your children in the way they should go. Time, looking back, you will never regret. So put in the time and train them up the way God created them to go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it.